Hello and welcome to Revision Tips for SIPS Level 6, Professional Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 3, Global Strategic Supply Chain Management, Learning Outcome 3, which is to understand and apply techniques to achieve effective strategic supply chain management. So here we're going to look at approaches to developing and implementing supply chain collaboration, approaches to change management when working with stakeholders, and approaches to measuring supply chain performance, as well as how to develop knowledge and skills and how that can help with effective supply chain management. Okay, so we're going to look at the difference between transactional and collaborative here. So supply chain collaboration provides the operational systems with the agility to align the supply chain to the overall business strategy and respond appropriately. There's an increased emphasis on the importance of supply chain collaboration and an essential requirement for the delivery of organisation performance. So the first one we want to look at is efficient consumer response, ECR, a strategy aimed at increasing customer service levels through cooperation between retailers, wholesalers and manufacturers. And that's to improve the efficiency of the supply chain as a whole. It will include efforts to reduce opportunity loss and manage inventory levels with the shared purpose of delivering customer satisfaction. The second one, collaborative planning, forecasting and replenishment, or CPFR. This strategy is aimed at enhancing supply chain integration through the implementation of increased visibility and joint practices to manage inventory and improve product replenishment. And the third one you might be more familiar with, which is VMI, Vendor Managed Inventory. This strategy aims to streamline inventory management and order fulfillment by collaborating on improvements in the traditional ordering process. Now, the relationship between supply chain partners are obviously evolving, shifting from a more transactional to, I guess, a more collaborative, cross-functional, cross-disciplined teamwork. So the outcome, if a relationship is well managed, is increasing flexibility and commitment to supply chain management. And what we're looking at here is how traditional procurement and supply relationship management methods have progressed from that transactional approach to the supply chain orientation, which is found in more contemporary relationships. And there are 6 stages to the developments. You've got transaction orientation. That's the one that serves the factory. So it's based on the provision of raw materials and components. Absolutely no coordination, as the organisation lacks any explicit purchasing strategy. The goals are primitive. So the supply relationship is reactive, and it's very administrative. Second step, commercial orientation, that's going for the lowest price. So you might have a function that operates as a standalone, but with relationship and suppliers based on a proactive negotiation, and it's all about lowering prices. And you concentrate on savings and measuring performance on price variances. So the relationship is based on the ability to secure the best deals. Coordinated purchasing is where your function is centralized and operates a uniform policy. So you've got clear processes and systems that focus on cross-unit coordination, compliance to negotiated agreements. And here your internal relationships are managed through rules and procedures, which include the control of purchasing and non-production items. So here you can kind of develop a little bit of purchasing power, I suppose. But as a result, it's often seen as a bit bureaucratic and slow to respond to the business unit. The fourth one, where you've got internal integration and cross-functional purchasing, is where you begin to become more integrated. So cross-functional problem solving that contribute to cost reduction across the system as a whole. And the procurement team interact with supply partners to work together to solve the problems. And there will be an attempt to streamline procurement processes to meet the needs of the internal customers. But those integrated information systems are used to support the cross-functional purchasing. Benchmarking and customer satisfaction surveys are used for evaluation purposes. The fifth level, external integration, is all about supply chain management, where you're integrating relationships as a result of maybe an outsourcing strategy or developed in cooperation or in conjunction with another supply chain partner. That could be product development, pre-production planning, but systems are simplified using technological capabilities. And the last one, which is the value chain integration. Now we've got a recognition that procurement and supply strategies need to deliver value to the end customer. Strong relationships are encouraged with the suppliers who are challenged to support and participate in the development management. And this is all to get an effective and an efficient value chain. So here, procurement and supply relationships lead to formations of virtual teams, which support an entrepreneurial culture throughout the supply chain. So we're now going to look at sort of applying something called PADI and the 4 key forces for supply chain management success. So it's all about, inter-organizational commitment in order to be successful, improving customer service, and all of that is kind of meaningless unless there's performance outcomes. So these are the 4 key forces that would determine the organization's supply chain management success. So in terms of competition, what competitive situation of the organization is relating to both its customers and its competitors? From a strategy perspective, what's the procurement and supply functions plan to respond to the demands of the marketplace? Cultural considerations looks at the internal capability that exists within the organization to execute that strategy. And leadership is looking at the style of leadership. That's going to be prevalent in an organizational system and the impact it has on an organization's culture as a whole. Now, Gatorna described how the PADI model aligned with a theory of psychological types of groups or situations, resulting in 4 logics. They're referred collectively as the PADI framework. The first one, the P, is production. The force provides the energy, actions, and results required for a supply chain contribution to achieving the overall business strategic objectives. It's also known as pragmatic or performance or producer. In the bottom right-hand corner, you've got that thinking behavioural force. A is for administration. The force allows you to develop the analysis system and control needed to manage the organisation's resources effectively. The D, development, delivers the creativity, the change, the flexibility needed to respond to the appropriate competitive environment and anticipate any future demands. So that's sometimes also known as divergent. And integration is the force provided that gives cohesion, cooperation, and relationships to drive collaboration and synergies within the supply chain. Now, Gatorna overlays PADI framework into the Myers-Briggs indicator, which you will have studied at level 5 module 1. The model explains the characteristics that are exhibited by the leadership within each of those 4 dominant logics. Now, Whipple and Russell identified 4 key building blocks for collaborative relationships and customers, as well as the suppliers. I mean, it's the development of mutual objectives with relevant performance measures, such as policy integration, or the development of decision-making domains, or mechanisms for information sharing, as well as alignment with rewards and incentives. But there are also 3 types of collaborative approaches. The first one, collaborative transaction management. The most highly subscribed form supports inventory management and scorecard collaboration, but no joint decision-making decisions. They're not communicated to partners once they've been made. But you're using this when planning improvements in the transactional exchange process with your supply partners. And it's facilitated through the development of IT tools. And it's all about improvements in data integrity and standardizing information. Type 2 is the collaborative event management, where you've got joint planning and decision-making taking place in managerial promotional events or improvements in particular products or service range. You get tacit knowledge here that's used to respond to event planning, and it seeks input from your supply partners in that planning process. And you've got the development of standards for the decision-making process and the exchange of any implicit knowledge. Type 3 is a collaborative process management. The benefits of collaborative relationships become more apparent. You get advanced levels of sharing of information. Strategic partners input into shared decision-making processes. Collaborative efforts include shared strategic decision-making and long-term planning, as well as sharing resources of maybe systems and processes, and learning together to develop knowledge capabilities, as well as the development of trust. Shared business goals and inter-organizational processes are required to support the development of collaborative event management. Shared service models are an organizational model that involves the standardization and centralization of services, which are delivered locally at a team, departmental, or organizational level. They include delivering strategic added value, increasing efficiency, and improving service levels, which offers an opportunity for collaborative working. The three primary models of shared services is cradle to grave, specialization, and hybrid. So cradle to grave is where you're responsible for cradle to grave procurement and supply functions throughout the supply chain. Specialization is responsible for particular parts of procurement activities. And hybrids are for each element of the supply chain. There'll be a separate team that will design a unique service responsible for procurement, logistics, operations, and supply, while other areas may offer their own specialist teams. So the implementation steps is firstly to plan, which is to review the core procurement and supply components that relate to supply chain goals, the milestones, and a stakeholder and communication strategy. Secondly, evaluate. Decide which model of the supply chain is best for your organisation and supply partners. Which design is going to optimise return on investment? Where can added value be achieved through service delivery? And then design it. Develop an organisational design and the roadmap required to drive the change process and transform the supply chain, including governance processes, enabling technology and service level agreements. Moving on to implement. So now we need to develop communication messaging and agree performance metrics between supply partners. You even need to establish project management protocols and transition steps, preparing shared services facilities. Maybe deliver training and development on new operational systems for those that are staffed in the shared service centre. And then finally, optimise. That's finalising the timeline for implementation, allowing time for evaluation and refinement of processes to implement the shared service centre, but also monitor the deliverables, expand technology, make changes to the processes and policies, and ultimately refine the training at the end. Okay, so the bullwhip effect, you might be familiar with this. This is when you get distorted demand increasing up the supply chain. Unexplained phenomenon. So when you get things like panic buying in supermarkets, it creates this bullwhip effect, which has an impact on data integrity. And data integration in the supply chain is the mechanism within the supply chain that ensures the right data passes through the right process at the right time. So that creates a seamless flow of information in the end-to-end chain. And it's all about achieving customer satisfaction. And there's loads of systems out there, robotics, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. But what this does is it tends to increase the need for access to data between the supply partners, hence the integration. But we need to be careful of those sort of, bullwhip effects type examples, because it can really distort the data. So the need for data integration is driven by a number of internal and external environmental forces. You've got automation, which is the increasing use of robotics in production and service delivery that's required for the operation of data systems which govern the automation process. You've got connectivity and smart systems, which gathers and uses information and improving operational efficiency. Also, monitoring and tracking software, which utilizes data integration to provide control systems, which may require intervention. Big data, the ability to make informed decisions and take actions within the supply chain needed. So this needs integration of data in order to collect information from several sources and perform analytics, providing details about your supply chain ecosystems. In terms of work processes, this is when your supply chain processes are driven by the integration of a number of applications, and that triggers the next stage in the process. These systems are data dependent. If the right materials or resources are available to deliver the products and service to the end customer, then the data in the supply chain needs to be available at the right time. And finally, innovation and creativity. The whole kind of marketplace means that the organisation needs to be positioned to understand what challenges and opportunities exist to improve efficiency or drive additional revenue. And data integration can give visibility to components of that supply chain that can be improved or captured to change in customer needs and demands. Now, change programs affect the procurement and supply function. They're usually focused on systems, processes, and procedures that facilitate the efficiency and effectiveness, but change facilitated through managing efforts of people in the organisation is also important. So it requires effective management of people throughout the supply chain. So for procurement, they've got an important role in translating the goals of change management for their key stakeholders. Now, Hodges offers the RACI framework for providing clarity about what should be communicated to customers, suppliers, or even the senior managers, and the extent to which they should be engaged in that change initiative. So who should be responsible? Who's got the responsibilities in that change process? That needs to be identified along with their responsibilities. That will be about decision-making, tasks, or activities. And then who should be accountable? Whose head's going to roll if things go wrong? And who's accountable for making sure those change tasks and activities are completed? It's usually project managers or sponsors. Who might you need to consult? There might be stakeholders who've got expert knowledge or knowledge about information that is pertinent to that change process. So procurement needs to consult with these people in order to gain insights that are relevant to the change process. And finally, who needs to be informed? So who's going to be affected by that change? They're going to need to be informed about what's happening and why. This includes the development of communications to those who are responsible so that they know what's expected of them. Now, effective communication is not simply about providing the right information. It's about how the information is framed in order to affect individual interpretations of that change process. And change is ultimately a human process, and as such, it needs to be addressed with human emotions that change evokes. In itself, you can actively engage with people on an emotional level, but to do so requires an appeal to people's emotions. So change communication needs to utilize the marketing tools that are designed to fully engage people on an emotional level. And these are 3 tools that can be used to make communication very compelling. You've got your actions and your symbolisms. This means painting a picture of what the world would be like once the change has occurred. It's just one aspect of making people feel a little bit enthusiastic about the proposed change. But it also needs to be inspiring. What's going to be different? What's the benefits? Messaging should be memorable, using branding and strap lines to capture the essence of that change, alongside tangible actions that need to be taken in order to get there, wherever there is. You've got some analogies and metaphors here which are useful to frame communication as an analogy or a metaphor, creating understanding and driving the legitimacy of the change programme. So they can be used if the change is being framed in the context of the past and established practices. Metaphors can be used for the purpose of change, to break with the past, creating comparisons with something that becomes familiar. And then compelling stories is where the storytelling connects people on an emotional level. When change is occurring, it's really important that leaders and managers engage directly with the people to tell that compelling story about why the change is important and the transformation that will occur to secure that future organisation. Now, obviously, the person responsible for making that change happen is more commonly known as a change agent. Now, that could be somebody internal, that could be somebody external, but ultimately they're responsible for driving the business in the direction of where they want to be to make the change happen. Now, Senior and Swales highlights the importance of developing a team of change agents to ensure that they can have the relevant skills and competencies that are needed during that change process. Here are 5 key areas of change agent competencies that are needed. Goals. So this includes the ability to clarify achievable goals and the flexibility to manage risks and respond to change in dynamics and shifting project goals. They need roles as well, the ability to manage stakeholders within that process, collaborative working, working alongside the change agent to unify itself, maybe even networking internally or externally, managing uncertainty. You need good communication. Personal attitude and behaviour affects how others perceive change. So if the change agent needs to ensure they demonstrate a high level of enthusiasm and personal commitment to the proposed change and has that excellent communication and interpersonal skills, that's going to help them to engage other people in that change process and manage their concerns. Remembering, of course, that communication, I should say, is a two-way process. They need a negotiation competency, making sure that they can achieve goals, and that requires an element of negotiation and being able to influence people to allocate the relevant resources to make sure it happens. So you're successfully setting the vision for the future state that the change process is seeking to achieve. And managing up, maybe one of the hardest ones here, because politics and power are an enormous part of change, and they must be managed by the change agent to be successful. So it means being able to overcome resistance, manage conflict, and take a broad view of priorities. So I guess change agents do not have to be in a position of hierarchical leadership to be effective and drive a programme, but they need to enlist individuals with power to help their efforts and facilitate change. And there are a number of sources of power that can be utilised to execute effective change and develop a guiding coalition. So you've got position power. The power is derived as a result of individual roles or hierarchical positions, sometimes known as legitimate power. Expert power comes with skills, knowledge, expertise, which is valued by that change process. Personal power, sorry, I've put expert power on there twice. The third one is personal power. Regardless of an individual's positional power, they must still be able to influence others as a result of their personality traits. And the last one, which I've missed off the bottom, is negative power. An individual can be powerful for their ability to disrupt the change process and prevent the actions from progressing. So the change agent, the person who facilitates change within an organisation. And there are roles that a change agent may inhabit during that change process. You've got the seer, the ability to look beyond the current situation and anticipate what may happen in the future. With this comes a bit of skill and ability to know what's needed to be focused on and when. Or a translator, someone that's able to listen to messages from the organisation and stakeholders and translate messages from one person to another. So, for example, listening to the messages from the organisation and identifying the intentions and purpose behind the change programme, and then classifying those and finding the challenges and the opportunities that the organisation is facing. A cultivator is able to understand the rhythm and pace of a change programme, which informs when to slow the pace or to operate at a faster speed, so people in the organisation are given time to heal when they need it. And it helps to deliver wellness for the organisation during that change process. The catalyst is able to create momentum by capturing the organisational spirit for change. They're able to successfully combine different things or bring together a diverse group of people to create something new and exciting. A navigator is able to devise a map to facilitate people and organisations through the psychological change. This includes a deep appreciation of the direction of change versus the current space that an organisation is occupying. The change agent is able to map out a process which helps to propel people towards the future state. The teacher is able to teach people what they need to know in order to survive the impact of that change process. And the guardian, responsible for creating an ethical organisation as a result of the change process. So a guardian agent is self-aware and disciplined in developing their own self-awareness and the self-awareness of others. So the 5 key areas of change agent competencies is around the goals, the roles, communication, negotiation, and managing up, as I previously said. So how do we gauge acceptance of strategic change? There are some key questions to ask. Do stakeholders want the change? Do they believe it can be achieved? And are they embracing the change journey? So the 3 considerations when gauging acceptance is firstly the reaction. How does that stakeholder react to change? For example, the concepts of satisfaction or the perceptions of value. Whether the change process itself is believed to be producing the intended result. The level of trust with the change process, and whether the change experience is considered to be good or bad. The second is behaviour. So how stakeholder behaviour is being affected by the change. That can indicate an acceptance or embracing of that strategic change, and consider the following. How stakeholders have changed their approach to a particular task or activity as a result of that strategic change. The changes in the group norms, that's challenging the way someone is experiencing or adapting their behaviour. Or the learnings, how they're applying the strategic change to tasks and activities that they're responsible for. An acceptance of strategic change leads to an application of changes to the processes, procedures, and technical systems as a result of the change experience. Stakeholders who accept change will continue to reflect on their experience and find new ways of applying what they've learned through the change process. Now, there are some evaluation methods that you can use to gauge acceptance of strategic change. You can do interviews, which you can explore specific situations or the rationale behind actions and behaviours, or gather subjective perceptions. Assessment tools like the Organisational Readiness Change Assessment, or the ORCA tool, ORCA, and the Loss of Effectiveness Index, the LOE. This provides an evaluation of behaviours, perceptions and attitudes towards the proposed strategic change. You can do group reviews, used to gain knowledge of human interaction, behaviour and learning. It's also used to move behaviours and reactions forward by constructing a positive narrative regarding that strategic change and proactively addressing the rumours and the fears. You can do feedbacks and surveys, which can be attained in several different ways, maybe on a one-to-one basis or at discussions at your team meeting or a change briefing event or even through employee engagement. And an observation is understanding the change experience of individuals and providing an insight into their way of thinking. This might be used to investigate challenges and issues that are occurring so they can be comprehensively addressed. And finally, process mapping. You would use this to understand what is changing within that change process, providing procurement with a tool to engage in the dialogue with individuals and groups that are affected by the change, and examine how the changes being proposed is going to impact on their job role and whether those changes are acceptable. Now, Lyson and Farrington identified 4 classifications to approaches on supply chain performance measurements. The accounting approaches is using accounting data to consider the efficiency and effectiveness of planning and control within your supply chain. So those methods are going to be things like profit centres, activity-based costing, or standard costing and budgetary control. And decisions relating to the transfer of assets that are controlled by procurement professionals are measured in terms of the profits generated. The audit approach is a more comprehensive review of the entire procurement system. And you would do this on a periodic basis using internal and external audit professionals who are intended to be independent of that process. You can review the policies, procedures, and systems that are used in your supply chain to ensure they are the best working practice. Or collect, process, comply, analyse the reports of performance data. Assessing supply chain data collection tools, practices, and supporting systems to determine value-added recommendations. Now, these provide a measure as to whether the resources in the function are being used effectively. Comparative approaches rank your organisation's supply chain performance in relation to a selection of comparators, and that's based on a number of categories, like benchmarking or ratio and integrated benchmarking. The approaches are used to compare performance against other functions within your organisation and carry out operational benchmarks against the best external examples. And maybe even examine performance against competitors or against alternatives in order to understand the practices of successful organisations, which can be adapted for supply chain management. And finally, the miscellaneous approaches, which are mechanisms of quality control. You could record quantifiable aspects of the supply chain process, like Six Sigma, to define, measure, analyse, improve, and control. And you use the data for improvements in your business processes within your supply chain. Now, performance measures can provide that procurement person with quantitative evidence of the magnitude of assessments regarding properties within the supply chain. And the decision regarding what performance measures are going to be used are determined by the KPIs. And they're often expressed in terms of performance objectives as quality, speed, dependability, flexibility, and cost. So let's look at some examples of your objectives that you can use with each of those. So quality is about being right, I suppose. So here we'll measure the percentage of products that were manufactured to the specification or accuracy of information. When it comes to speed, it's about being fast, so the timeliness of your actions. How long does it take for a customer call to be answered? Dependability is being on time. And that right first time measures the percentage of deliveries which arrive on time and complete. Flexibility is being able to change. That's measured as a rate of innovation or customization. And cost is about being productive, and an efficiency measure as the cost per transaction completed or the price and discounts that you achieve. Now, once the organisation is clear on its strategic direction and the key performance indicators that it's going to use, the measures need to be developed at an organisation, function or individual level. Now, at the procurement and supply chain level, it's really important that you understand that it's not necessary for the procurement to be reinventing measures that the organisation is utilising to report to their key stakeholders. But at organisational level, it's normal practice for headline performance on growth rates, revenue, profit. They're all building blocks of evaluation criteria. So these building blocks of performance measures form part of the overall business strategy. And they're defined by a set of accounting and financial measures, such as earning before tax and interest, EBIT, or EBITDA, which is earning before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Liquidity, how well can you pay your debts? Return on assets, or return on investment, or even return on capital employed. What about your raw material costs and utilisation? Or even the productivity of your fixed assets, your capital expenditure, or even your inventory ratios. But there is a tendency to evaluate organisational performance using accounting methods, and that limits the organisation from monitoring non-financial dimensions. So the financial measures only ever examine performance retrospectively, since financial measures are lag measures. That's a form of measure that tracks the success of performance that's already occurred. Now, Norton's Balanced Scorecard provides a framework for measuring performance that can be used at every tier of the supply chain and throughout the supply chain partner network. It enables supply chain managers to monitor performance measures across the supply chain in relation to your strategic objectives. The measures should be linked to every level of the supply chain and should focus on the efficiency and effectiveness in order to ensure supply chain partners focus on the same outcomes throughout the supply chain. Now, suppliers should consider their contribution to operations from 4 perspectives or dimensions, each element of the balanced scorecard. So firstly, the internal process perspective. How their operations contribute to the achievement of quality, cost, flexibility, dependability, and speed as a result of any process improvements. The customer perspective. How monitoring and control processes can be implemented to collect customer feedback in order to examine the customer perception of the organisation's products and services or value proposition. The financial perspective is how they contribute to the financial impacts of the other perspectives, which can translate into positive financial performance. And the learning and growth perspective is how each component within the supply chain implements evaluation and continuous improvement efforts to deliver growth and development in the long term. So surveys are particularly useful if procurement is seeking details regarding feedback from people affected by recent actions or activities in that supply chain. It includes generating data about thoughts and opinions regarding performance and component parts of that supply chain as a whole, or forward-looking information about intentions or ideas of what would add value to their supply chain performance. And the result of this can really provide you with information about the patterns or performance considerations throughout the supply chain and opinions on performance based on any individual characteristics that are surveyed. Now, Jensen and Laurie outlined 6 key stages to the survey process. Firstly, identify the goals. This is about setting goals for the research, the questions about the supply chain performance. So what's that survey trying to discover? Develop data collection plan. This is about creating a plan about from where data is going to be collected. Are you going to do a survey, electronically or paper-based? And the sample used to collect data will need to be carefully considered. Who do they represent, for example? Then you design your questions in order to create valid and reliable results from that design. Effort needs to be given to designing questions that provide useful and unbiased data. Then you pilot your survey. Check that the designs of the survey are robust. Consider a pilot survey that will help highlight areas where maybe redesign and refinement might be required. Conduct your survey, simply send it out. That's not going to suffice, is it? It's essential that given to the whole or the same sample population, what strategy are you going to use to ensure that the response rates will be appropriate to produce the right results? And then your data analysis plan. Here you need to give considerations to the resources and statistical analysis skills that are going to be available to the organisation, analysing the data once it's been collected. Now, Brewer and Spey state performance measures should be hopeful. HOPE from the hopeful is the 4 words on the screen: harmonised, optimal, parsimonious, and economical. So the harmonised is connected across the 4 dimensions of the balanced scorecard. The optimal is objectives that should be balanced across all 4 dimensions to prevent overperformance in one area and substandard performance in another. The parsimonious should be complete. There should be a correlation between performance measures over the 4 dimensions, and there are no measures that cannot be connected to others. And the economical offers value by focusing efforts on optimal performance that exceeds the cost of quality control and monitoring that activity. There's been an increased interest in knowledge management since the early 1990s, and that's as a result of the identification of knowledge as a tangible asset which can be used to enhance organisational effectiveness. And it comes in a number of different forms. We can share knowledge via documents, content management, social interaction, and dialogue. But knowledge within the organisation and the suppliers is often undocumented, inaccessible, and at a risk of being lost. So the SECI model of knowledge management is being utilised to develop approaches to knowledge creation and conversation. The model identifies that the 2 different characteristics of knowledge is explicit and tacit. The explicit knowledge is the most basic form of knowledge available to an organisation. It's documented, it's accessible. Whether data is processed, organised and structured in an organisation, it provides us an opportunity for people to interpret the results, which leads to explicit knowledge. This can be articulated, communicated, recorded and stored. And then you've got tacit knowledge. This knowledge develops as a result of personal experience and involves within a particular context. So it's often difficult to articulate or record it from a tangible form. It often relates to something that individuals may describe as having a feel for. And tacit knowledge at the supply chain is going to result from practical application of implicit knowledge. That in turn develops as a result of practical application of any explicit knowledge. So knowledge about how to use a printer will come from obviously instructions, which is explicit, but the ability to know how to position it and all the other stuff that kind of goes with it is from your own personal experience. So the SECI model that I mentioned to you earlier proposes 4 ways that explicit and tacit knowledge can be combined and converted to support knowledge sharing and creation. The 4 methods of converting knowledge will include socialization. So this process converts the tacit knowledge to tacit knowledge as a result of unwritten types of knowledge sharing. It's things like social interactions, which leads to knowledge being passed on in practice, guidance, imitation, and observation. The externalization is the process of converting tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. This is considered to be particularly difficult, but critically important. So you encourage individuals to codify what they know into tangible and permanent records, like documents and manuals, so that this tacit knowledge can be shared with the supply chain. The combination is the conversation combining explicit knowledge to develop new forms of explicit knowledge. In the simplest form, it's knowledge sharing, where codified knowledge like documents are combined to create new knowledge like reports or analysis. And internalization converts explicit knowledge into tacit knowledge. So here, your knowledge is shared and codified from something that's initial, but the explicit sources are shared, used, learned, and that knowledge is internalized, which modifies an individual's existing tacit knowledge. Now, one mistake that organisations make is to assume that technology is the panacea of knowledge management issues. And although technology can be used to document everything that we know for easiest access, the primary benefit to knowledge management is to provide a means by which that tacit knowledge can be communicated. Now, the process of knowledge management are dominated by social interactions and dialogues and the ability to find and assess people who have that knowledge that's required, like our supply partners in the supply chain. But we've got, geographical or time restrictions, which is why it's really important in that knowledge management process. So procurement have to create the opportunities and process to ensure the supply chain network facilitates sharing and development of knowledge. And it can be achieved through encouraging that culture of openness, trust, transparency, creating opportunities and encouraging people to share knowledge, emphasising the importance. It can be done with deliberate design. So this involves being deliberate about the design and development of our knowledge sharing process and the reward of knowledge sharing. There should be a support of the creation of knowledge management and performance for our policies and procedures, but acknowledging the value of knowledge. And then there's the social learning, which is all about how people learn from one another through social interaction. And knowledge is shared predominantly through knowledge, social interaction. So creating time and space to bring people together is going to assist in the dissemination and generation of knowledge within your organisation and supply chain. And the promotion of knowledge management. This is where tacit knowledge is not something that many people in organisations think about. Influencing the conversation and promoting the importance of knowledge with leadership is important to develop robust knowledge management strategies. So in terms of procure and supply management competencies, there's a list of statements that outline how an individual employee or supply chain partner is expected to carry out a job or a task. What skills or knowledge will they be able to do that task efficiently? Provide information about what knowledge and skills contribute to that success. And how that links to organisational performance. Then the competency analysis is evaluating the scope and work required for a particular supply chain task or activity. And that could be in comparison with other tasks or activities. But the CIPS global standard is to have 5 levels of competencies. which you can see on the screen. You might have to pause it to really understand what this is saying, because it's quite hard to read. But the first one is something tactical. The second one is operational. The third, managerial. The fourth, professional. And the fifth is advanced professional. And you can use this to identify the competency requirements of teams and individuals. You know, it depends on what level you're at within an organisation as to what level of competence you're going to need. And this enables the procurement professional to develop fair and unbiased criteria for choosing who to employ for a particular role. And it also ensures everyone's being, measured against the same framework. So it can be used for a number of different human resources processes, including looking at job descriptions, performance and management, recruitment and selection, learning and development, as well as talent management and succession planning. Now, training and development in the global supply chain provides a process by which individuals and teams and functions can be supported to deliver the knowledge and skill that they need. So the purpose of training and development to improve supply chain performance is also there to contribute to personal growth of the individuals. People are a key resource to any organisation. So the emphasis on the human or the resource in human resources can determine the physiological approach taken towards skills knowledgement. So training and development to improve knowledge and skills is not an event that once occurs. Instead, it occurs throughout the tenure of an individual and a supply partner. They vary in, it's all different contexts, including initially an induction, making sure that any new employee has the requisite capabilities to succeed in the role. You've got performance management, continuous feedback and support to ensure that the knowledge and skill gaps are identified and closed. Career planning, providing guidance to the individuals to support their own training and development. This is concerned with the future performance of an individual. Talent management, identifying and supporting individuals who have demonstrated that they've got the potential to fulfill future capability needs, which leads on nicely to succession planning. Who's going to be in that role in a few years' time? And also exit planning. That's not the nicest one to think about, but you have to proactively support individuals whose knowledge and skills are no longer aligned to the strategic direction of an organisation. So the 4 distinct stages of training and development are on the screen, but although in reality the process of knowledge and skills is an iterative process, but nonetheless the 4 stages are firstly to identify the training needs. You can do a training needs analysis to assess the current state of knowledge and skills versus where you need them to be. Second stage is to plan. You need to design what the training outcome will be. What skills, what knowledge, and the choice of your training technique. It can be on the job, it can be formal qualifications, courses, but then you go and implement it. So your training and intervention is delivered through a use of different methods. Finally, and the bit that's quite often missed, is the evaluation, reviewing that training and development to determine how successful that intervention has been. Now, the 3 categories of training and development that can be utilised is, firstly, any formal learning. So this involves interventions that are based on organised and structured contexts, like a formal education or a corporate training programme. These may be as a result of a formal recognition for a certificate or a diploma. It's considered a result of intentional learning. So, CIPS as a professional qualification is a form of formal learning. Or you could be doing a master's in business administration, an MBA. Non-formal learning are training and development interventions that are not designed specifically with the purpose of learning, but result in the individual being subjected to an opportunity for intentional learning. So, for example, a team meeting or a networking event. And then informal learning is unstructured and it occurs as a result of your individual daily workload or your non-work activities. It's accidental learning, if you like. So how to complete a new procedure on a system or discovering something that was not known before. Now, procurement need to understand that their job, role and tasks need to be conducted in order to deliver an efficient global supply chain, not just now, but in the future. So in order to understand what approach is most appropriate, we need to consider the capabilities, which job level, and that all goes into like a person's spec. And you can also put it into a learning specification as well. But what you can see on the screen here is the Kilpatrick taxonomy. This model examines 4 levels of training and development evaluation. The first level is reactions, you know, what the participants' reaction was to that training. Were they liked by the intervention? What did they feel about how the training was received? The second level is the learning. What facts, knowledge and principles or other information do they remember? And then behaviours, you know, what did they learn from that? Are they using that on their job today? But the fourth one is the outcomes, the results from that training they're delivering, increased productivity or improvements to cost efficiency. Now, the taxonomy has received significant criticism because attention has focused predominantly on the reaction level rather than the analysis of improvements that have been made. So, you know, you need to look at this in terms of return on investment. So when you're analysing that return on investment, training and development for procurement professionals, you need to consider the full cost that you've incurred during that intervention. So it's direct costs like the training materials, the room, the fees, the facilitator, but any indirect costs such as your salary by that working day, which is lost as a result of you participating in a training course. So there are a number of financial outcomes and advantages which provide measurements that contribute to the organisation's strategic priorities. So the first one is sales performance. Maybe you've got better revenue, better profit. The second is process improvement. So have you actually improved your cost efficiency? Productivity, the measuring the change of productivity. Or cost to acquire a customer, which focuses on the effectiveness of efforts to expand your customer base. The customer retention rate. This provides an indication of loyalty and the quality of customer service being delivered by your employees. And the revenue renewal rate that focuses on revenue retaining rather than customers. That provides an indication of increases in the share of wallet, upsell and cross-sell or revenue growth. And that's the end of Learning Outcome 3. Thank you very much for watching.